Tonight, joining us to talk all about Alabama politics and her campaign is Tabitha Isner, who is a candidate for the House of Representatives from Alabama's 2nd District. Welcome, Tabitha.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
Could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your campaign? Were you involved in politics a lot before you decided to run? Sort of what's your background?
Yeah, absolutely. I've definitely been involved in politics for a long time. I have worked on other congressional campaigns and worked on other issue-based campaigns, and always find myself getting involved in whatever the local issue of the day is. So testifying at the legislature about bills that come up and organizing people within the community to do both kind of protest kind of events and also more behind the scenes work to get people in the right room to come up with solutions. So I've always loved public service and felt like that was home for me.
Tell us a little bit about the 2nd District. For people who don't necessarily live in Alabama, what's it like there? What are the demographics like?
Absolutely. So the 2nd District is the biggest district in Alabama. It is 10,000 square miles. And it is the southeast corner of the state. So it extends along the Georgia border, along the Florida panhandle, and is a very large piece of land. It's mostly rural. That's why it's so large. Lots of farmland, small towns, and then we have a small slice of Montgomery, which is the biggest metropolitan area, really the only metropolitan area in the district.
It looks like this is a winnable district for Democrats. So it doesn't look like that necessarily looking at the stats and the demographics of the district, but looking at the voting history. So the 2016 election, not that it was like the Democrats were almost there, but 48% to 40% is not that bad for Republican district. And as recently as 2010, there was a Democratic representative in the district.
Yes. So Alabama's kind of a funny place. We were one of the last, there was the great transition when the parties kind of switched identities or changed identities anyway. And so Alabama was one of the last places where Democrats had a large stronghold. So it really wasn't so long ago that Alabama switched from being a mostly Democrat state to being a mostly Republican state. And we take great pride here in being independent. One of our favorite sayings is, so you say, and that general instinct to always question what the common wisdom is in the rest of the United States and be willing to go our own way on things. So I do think that leads to lots of possibilities in Alabama that might not be possible elsewhere. With that said, it has been a very Republican state, but the current incumbent, Martha Roby, is wildly unpopular even among Republicans. So the Republican Party is trying to replace her in the primary because they know that she's very likely to lose in the general if she gets the nomination.
And if I'm reading Ballotpedia correctly, the most recent Democrat to hold that seat, Bobby Bright, is now running as a Republican for that seat?
Yeah, like I said, it's an interesting place. Yeah, and Bobby is an interesting guy. He used to be the mayor of Montgomery, and he was very popular at the time. And he's a moderate. He's kind of in the middle on things. A best case reading of him is that he, looks for nonpartisan solutions. And a worst case reading is that he's got his finger in the air looking to see which way the wind is blowing. So there are some who believe each of those things about him. But it'll be interesting to see if the Republican Party is willing to consider him on the Republican ticket, since he was a Democrat right up until the day he declared that he was a Republican.
Interesting. And, it tracks with you saying that this is a mostly rural district, but the median household income is quite low, $41,000. Unemployment is pretty high at 11%. And the college graduation rate of only 20% is pretty low for what I've seen of most districts.
Mm-hmm.
How do those things play into the kinds of issues that people are concerned with there?
People here, I think, unfortunately have come to accept the current state of affairs as an inevitable reality. And there's a certain feeling there's an insularness where folks don't feel poor. We look at those numbers and, I'm someone who's lived in a lot of other places and certainly see those numbers as devastatingly low. But the people here feel content, for the most part, feel like this is pretty standard living. And there's definitely interest in having more opportunities. But the greatest complaint is that our young people graduate from high school and go away to college and never return. So there's a lot of interest. There's a sense that there's good reason for people not to come back, but there's also a lack of vision for what an alternative future could look like. So that's something that I, have been talking with people about and trying to bring, there are certainly folks who do have vision and see the possibilities of this region and trying to make sure that those voices are heard, because in a one-party state, oftentimes voices for change get pushed to the side. There's no reason to talk about change when one party dominates so completely.
So what are some of the issues that you are particularly passionate about and would like to see change in the region?
Well, one of the biggest things that I'd like to see change in the region is the economic situation. So the diversity of employers and industries needs to be greatly expanded. Right now, we're a very military-heavy district. We have 2 bases, and we fear the BRAC process each time it's discussed because a closure of either base would be devastating to the community. So we really need to diversify our economy and be able to have more options to have a more stable economic outlook. We also have a challenge with a lot of low-paid industrial jobs in chicken farms and in agricultural work and in more industrial things like automotive industry. So we assemble, lots and lots of cars here in Alabama. And we've given a lot of tax breaks to those companies to bring their business to Alabama. But we haven't gotten the kind of benefits that we hoped for out of that. So I'd like to see us, instead of giving massive tax breaks to bring those big corporations here, I'd like to see us spending that same kind of money to support small business incubators, innovation centers, really giving our young people the encouragement, support, and skills to start their own business and develop the district from the inside out, rather than expecting some company to come in and provide for us. That's simply not a sustainable way to develop an economy.
Have you been seeing any sort of increase in sort of activity or enthusiasm for the Democratic Party in Alabama, especially, not only after 2016, but after Doug Jones's win?
Yes, absolutely. Like I mentioned, it has historically been, for the past 20 years, a one-party state, and there's been very little action from the Democratic Party. And the Doug Jones race really snuck up on us, I think. But there was no way we were going to let Roy Moore get elected. And it was just the perfect storm to get folks excited and interested in getting involved. So most of the counties in my district, for example, don't have a local Democratic Party. There just isn't an active organization at the county level. So having the Doug Jones race, all of a sudden people started coming together who hadn't been meeting before and saying, let's get involved and let's do something together. And so that's really reinvigorated the Democratic Party and given us new hope and energy. So we've seen a massive increase in the number of Democrats who are running for office in 2018 compared to previous years, and particularly in some of the bigger races where often we've had no candidates, we now have Democratic primaries happening and really exciting candidates coming forward. So it is a really, really exciting time.
One of the things that we heard a lot about with the Doug Jones election was that the African American vote really turned out, and that was a huge part of the difference and a huge part of where the win for Doug Jones came from. What does the racial makeup of your district look like? And do you think that's something that's going to play a role in the 2018 election?
Yeah, it's it's impossible to avoid here in Alabama. The Democratic Party is really dependent on the African American vote for any victories. And so I think it creates a really powerful voice, hopefully, for the African American community. And we take that very seriously on our campaign and have made it a priority to make sure that we have a very inclusive approach to our campaign events and our campaign conversations. You know, where I live in Montgomery, all of my local elected officials are Democrats, and they're all African American. So we have those kind of, where there are Democratic strongholds in the state, they tend to be held exclusively by African Americans. And yet at the state, for statewide offices and congressional districts, there's a challenge because it's much more difficult to elect African American candidates to those larger seats because the Republican Party is so overwhelmingly white. So, and usually to win, we need some Republicans to cross over. So it's a very challenging dynamic, and something that I think the Democratic Party is committed to addressing and taking seriously. So someone like Doug Jones is getting, there's a lot of nervousness that he's not going to live up to his promises and not going to respect the sacrifice and the incredible commitment of the African American community to get him elected. And I think that's a real challenge for candidates, and one that I, as a white candidate, take very seriously.
I just wanted to ask a little bit about your faith. I know that you have an MDiv from the University of Chicago. I know your husband is also ordained. Are you ordained as well?
Yes.
And I know on your website you talk a lot about how faith is important to you. Can you talk a little bit about how that plays into your campaign?
Absolutely. So my political passions and my core values are really rooted in my faith. I was taught, from as early as I can remember, that as a Christian, it is our responsibility to feed the hungry and care for the sick and welcome the stranger and liberate the oppressed. And I truly believed that was not just a nice ideal, but a daily moral imperative to live that out on as large of a scale as possible. So I take that very seriously, and it motivates me and the work that I do. So in that sense, I'm a Democrat because I think the Democratic Party does a better job of feeding the hungry and caring for the sick and welcoming the stranger and liberating the oppressed. I also think that, the project of religion and the project of public policy are so similar, which is why I did the Master of Divinity and Master of Public Policy together. When we're talking about church, we're talking about how do we create a community together of people who are fundamentally broken or sinful, we often say in church, people who can't help but hurt one another and do things that they will regret. And yet, nonetheless, we want to still be together, living in community. And that's going to require reconciliation, justice, and coming back together in a community, figuring out what's the process of grace by which we're able to be one again, even after those betrayals between people. And the project of public policy is really the same thing. Here we are as a society made up of people who are imperfect, who are going to get addicted, who are going to commit crimes, who are going to offend one another. And how do we nonetheless create a society that is cohesive and can be together, where there's both justice and also the opportunity for reconciliation and reintegration into the society as a whole. So I think those are very related projects. Talking about religion, though, is often, talking about being a Christian and being a politician is often very difficult because there's an assumption, a stereotype about what a Christian politician is like. And so I often follow up my comments about my faith by explaining that although my faith is important to me, I never want for my religious convictions to be a weapon used against anyone else. And they motivate me to, again, feed the hungry and care for the sick. They don't motivate me to oppress another group of people just because they don't share my particular religious beliefs.